What we are seeing is an absolute absence of empathy or recognition of the humanity of Palestinians, with some exceptions, but that's the driving narrative.
A year ago, you spoke at the UN Security Council and you gave a briefing of context.
I would say that for Israel itself, the absence of an off-ramp on this journey towards a new paradigm should be a cause for concern, placing in jeopardy that country's future.
If we hear back what you said 14 months ago, we could almost say that you were seeing exactly what's happening now. Tell us, how come no one listened to you a year ago?
In fact, it's obvious. I would have imagined it would be obvious that if you have a situation where Palestinians are given no hope, where this day-to-day grind of abnormality, of living under this system of occupation, this system of denial of basic rights and freedoms. And then you close off all avenues of political recourse, all options to change that situation in a non-violent way. Diplomacy, no one takes that seriously. Taking actions to change Israel's cost-benefit equation so that Israel would be held accountable for this ongoing situation? No, America and others guarantee Israel's impunity. Can we go to the ICC? No, the ICC is considering it, but there's no movement. And the West has opposed the idea of it being considered. If you close all these avenues, then it does not justify the recourse to the kind of violence that we saw, which violates international law. But it makes it extremely likely that there will be a violent explosion, because the occupation, what all these human rights, Palestinian, Israeli, international human rights group have called a system that meets the legal definition of apartheid, this is inherently structurally violent. So the violence is there already embedded in the reality of daily life. And then you get an explosion. You get, of course, a huge intelligence military failure on the Israeli side. And the scenes were appalling. Let's not mince our words on this. But we have created the conditions, not just for that to happen, but also for what we see now, which is a crime being committed against the population of Gaza.
There's no deny of the suffering from both sides since the 7th of October. But when we look at Western media coverage in the past week, we feel that it's as if the Western media was surprised all of a sudden, as if they thought that everything ended and Israelis and Palestinians are living peacefully side by side since Oslo. You were part of the team who drafted Oslo, who was in the talks of Oslo. What happened since then up to now?
Well, there was a complex set of arrangements, but there was something quite simple at the core of this, which is that the PLO, the Palestine Liberation Organization, led by the Fatah party, recognized Israel, got out of armed struggle. And it's also important to remember that people living under an illegal occupation, people living under occupation, have the right to resist, but within the rules of law, just as Israel has the right to defend itself, but within international law, which it's not doing, of course. So the deal is recognize Israel, get out of the business of breaking international law, go into a negotiating process. And the outcome one assumed would be Palestinian sovereignty on just 22% of the land. And many Palestinians, for good reason, I'm sure, said, this isn't a great deal for us. This isn't the kind of historic justice, whether for refugees or others, that we sought. But nonetheless, this was the premise of Oslo. What happened instead is that this limited self-governing authority starts to function over just islands, small parts of the West Bank, also over parts of Gaza. We'll come back to Gaza later, perhaps. The settlements, the illegal Israeli settlements continue, they increase. The occupation gets entrenched. Israel doesn't make good on its commitments. And of course, there were mistakes made by both sides. Perhaps the largest mistake on the Palestinian side was to continue to believe that this was a way forward. And here we are, 30 years later. The situation of the Palestinians is much, much worse. The basic deal, the basic premise of Oslo has not been adhered to. And America, who has a kind of monopoly on this, the guarantor of the peace process, basically let Israel get away with violating every important provision of that peace process. And unsurprisingly, the Israelis started looking around and saying, wait a minute, we don't have to stick to this. We can just carry on doing whatever we want with the Palestinians. No one seems to be holding us to account. It's very controversial internally. So why not? We'll just do that. What's really important is that, as you say, the way the Western media has looked at this, it's as if, as of Friday night, things were kind of going okay. And then Saturday morning, there was this horrendous rupture. It's true that for Israelis on Friday night, things were pretty okay. But for Palestinians on the Friday night and on every day of every week of every year for multiple decades, things have not been all right. Why are the Palestinians in Gaza refugees? Why do the Western media not recognize that history? But if I may, I think something even more pernicious is happening at this very moment. Because what we are seeing in Western media is the deep empathy displayed towards Israelis. And that's absolutely understandable and correct after what happened. But what we are seeing is an absolute absence of empathy or recognition of the humanity of Palestinians, with some exceptions, but that's the driving narrative. And when you do that at a moment like this, including if you're a Western leader, when you do that at a moment like this, you are playing into a bloody zero-sum narrative that it's either them or us, and you are encouraging Israel to take actions against the Palestinian population, which constitute, it is increasingly evident, a war crime. And it's horrendous.
From your point of view, how can this end?
We have to go back to the root causes, which is that Palestinian insecurity is a guarantor of Israeli insecurity. But right now, we have to walk back from what is looking like the build-up towards a horrendous, expansive war, and perhaps another mass displacement of Palestinians. And Israelis are just not going to come out of this more secure, let alone Palestinians.
Who could be the driving force right now for Israel to respect international human law?
I do not think that's an easy question to answer. What I do think is that, first of all, America should be held to what it has been arguing in a very self-righteous way from every platform available for the last 18 months in the context of the Russia-Ukraine conflict, which is that there's a rules-based order and it has to be adhered to, and we respect international law and we're the leader of this. And no, you're not. And the rest of the world sees you. It sees your double standards. It sees your selective application, and it's sick of it because you are warmongering. So I think the Americans need to feel that, need to question themselves. There's been a slight shift in language. We are living in a shifting global environment, a shifting geopolitical environment. There are countries in what's sometimes called the global south who have, I think, asserted themselves more, and that's good. And maybe we can see some kind of ad hoc coalition coming forward, putting its own position on the table, just as we saw several African heads of state visit Russia, Ukraine. We saw proposals come forward from Indonesia and elsewhere. And I think perhaps, not that these will be listened to by Israel, but it can create pressure on the West. We're watching you, we're pushing you, do something. And likewise from inside the region of Middle East, North Africa, West Asia, whether it's from the immediate neighbors, whether it's from those countries that have normalized with Israel, that have had those accords, maybe they should step up. You know, is this what you bought into? And if we can generate from the bottom up and from the top down that kind of pressure, then maybe America will budge and carry Israel along with it, because America has been the irresponsible actor thus far.